You were asking in our last podcast, Josh, of like, well, what if you haven't been doing all of the correct things?
Right.
How do you, like, well, John Wayne did it with his adult kids.
Right.
Right. So like at any time you can make
you could
improvements, do it now, just start.
Welcome to the Empowering Choices podcast. My name is Joshua.
I'm Lucas.
And I'm Erik.
Eric and Lucas are licensed professional counselors, and we've been talking about 5 things that dads do that push their sons away.
And so in this segment of our episode,
Number 5.
I've been listening to you too
Yes.
much, Josh. Good gravy. Unresolved pain and anger. So Erik, again, this was your list of things that you came up with. So like, kick us off. What made this feel like something that needed to be added to this list? You were talking about like things from the dad's life that are now impacting.
Yeah, so things that may have happened to them or impacted them in their own childhood, in their own growing up, that are still affecting how they interact with their children in the present day. Mm-hmm. So for instance, if you grew up and you didn't see or display a lot of affection, and one of your or several of your kids, they like and crave affection, it may be something that you as a dad are going to have a hard time with. It's something that's there because maybe affection, if you were trying to, draw that from your own father, that father may have either not wanted to participate, not participated, or even put you down as a person, calling you homosexual, or, this will make you gay, or, things of this nature that made the affection seeking seem like a bad thing.
I want to accuse you of over-exaggerating when you use that example, but it's not.
It's not. Yeah.
Depending on your environment or your own history.
Well, and I literally had an experience where I can't remember who it was, but I was going to work with a child on emotional vocabulary so that they could learn to be able to name the different emotions that they were experiencing.
Our bread and butter.
Yeah, and be able to identify what's going on, within the chemistry of themselves. And the mom was like, well, that's okay as long as it doesn't make him a sissy. I'm like, okay.
Do you want your kid to grow up like Clint Eastwood or John Wayne and just be like just a brick?
Well, and that's a really good question right there.
I mean, I think the mom should probably honestly answer that question.
Well, and for John Wayne, it didn't work well in his own life.
Well, that's literally my point.
Yeah.
You've mentioned like,
Yeah, but it was John Wayne was John Wayne on and off the scrin.
Sure, he wasn't acting. He just showed up in front of a camera.
He was himself. Yeah. He was the Duke. And, when he went to do, maybe this is a good example. When he got the script for the movie The Sons of Katie Elder, because there's 5 sons in that movie, I believe, and 1 grandson, or 4. I can't remember which one it was. But he read that and he said, I want this. I want to do this movie because you have a dad, you have 5 sons, and you have a grandson. Well, he had 5 sons and a grandson. And the problem was he was estranged from all of them at the time. And so for him to be able to get them to do the movie with him, he had to do work on what had made them estranged. And his oldest son, it took over a year of patching that relationship up before he was like, all right, you know what, we will do this together. And I'm like, oh, I have got to see this movie again, because now I'm because I didn't know it at first, those were his kids. And then I saw it again and I saw some of the interactions between, his oldest son in the film and him. And I'm like, oh, I get why you guys clashed. You're the same. I totally get this. Yeah. This was a hard thing, which means I'm like, my hat was off to him, because it's like that had to have been a lot of work that he had to put in to be able to heal those relationships. And I think it's a good example for this is how dads have been treated growing up, how dads have been treated in society, how dads have been treated by their family members are going to impact different ways that they're going to just be thinking about how to interact with their kids.
Right.
And to rewind just a second, you were asking in our last podcast, Josh, of like, well, what if you haven't been doing all of the correct things?
Right.
How do you, like, well, John Wayne did it with his adult kids.
Right.
Right. So like at any time
Yeah,
you can make
you could
improvements, do it now, just
Right.
start.
And I guess this is one of the areas where I think if you did not have something from your dad and then you realize you want that or to provide that, you may even struggle in that you don't even know where to start because it wasn't modeled for you. So what do you do if you're in that situation?
I've had parents that have come into counseling and they've said, listen, I have no idea how to be able to interact with my kids. I was working with one family to be able to help kind of build the bridges back with he and his two kids. One of them was 6 and the other was like 8 or 9. And with the 6-year-old, we're going to be in the playroom. We're going to be playing. With the 9-year-old, I'm bringing games in and we're working on the emotional vocabulary development, the communication building that we're going to do in there. And when I told him this is how we're going to do this, he looked at me and said, I have no idea how to play because I never got shown as a kid, never really got to play.
That's the dad talking.
That's the dad. And I'm not a game person. And so I looked at the dad and said, this is going to be really hard for you. But don't worry, we're going to get there. And he was like, okay, I'm game, And he, 4 or 5 months in, I'm finding out that he is building a library of games at his house.
Okay.
And he's thanking me for the impact to his checkbook. And in the playroom, he is really, because a part of that is that I'm guiding the play. Here's how play looks. And I'm kind of guiding his actions to interact with his son who's creating the play and initiating the play. And I'm helping to model that, And so now he's actually told me, I love games. I had no idea that games could be so interactive and so fun.
Wow.
He can play with his son all day long, in the make-believe world. Which is not something he'd ever seen, done, or experienced as a child. Other examples are, parents come in and they're like, I have no idea how to be able to talk to my kid. These are going to be tough places for me to watch them grow up in because here's what it was like for me. And what really helps those parents is being able to process through those places and being able to work through what was tough for them, because then that frees them to be able to interact with their kids in a less restraintive type of way.
So that sounds like there's a little bit of where you have to kind of do something to deal with your own issues that were created there in order to then be a better parent.
Well, I think in our title it says unresolved pain and anger.
Yeah.
To repeat myself, to resolve.
Right.
You would have to resolve that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to back up a little bit, I think something that's fascinating, I think a lot of people, when they think about counseling or services that are available, they just view it all as sitting and talking. And they don't view that, this is something that maybe someone actually could help me learn to play with my kid or how to do that, or game rooms. And obviously not all counselors everywhere have all those resources and the things the way you guys do. But that is one of the things. How would you know, like, where's a place where I just go, wow, I can probably just chug through this on my own, and listening to this podcast makes me feel like whatever. And where do I go? Man, I probably really should try to find a good counselor that can help us walk through this. Like, where's that line and how do you sort of determine that?
It feels like to me you would want to ask yourself that question of how is it going?
Yeah.
If you are in the place of you're listening to this podcast and thinking to yourself, I don't have any idea where to start on resolving my own unresolved pain and anger. Well, that might be a place to seek some outside help.
Yeah.
And you could start, like the thing that I always ideally want for the people who are seeking our services is to be able to solve their own problems potentially internally.
Right.
But we're saying in this scenario, that person goes, and then to reach out to your natural resources, friends,
Yeah.
family, relatives,
Right.
pastors, coaches, the people that you already have in your life, and
Right.
and you'd have to find somebody you'd be willing to say those things to.
Yeah.
Like, I got this stuff, and
Right.
and yeah, you just want to evaluate at each of those levels, and then if those people aren't available based on your life circumstance, or they also say, dude, I have no idea.
Right.
Then you might go seek out like a professional.
Yeah.
And then as you're evaluating your relationship with your kids, like, okay, well, all right, I need to go play with my kids. Okay, well, I played with Legos as a kid. Well, maybe I should try that with my own kid, and then give that a whack.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then if, again, it's the same kind of process.
Right.
You'd want to honestly ask yourself these questions and see how it's going, and or ask those other people in your life of like, I'm worried about my parenting. To like, am I? Because I'm imagining that a lot of us parents look at ourselves and go, "I'm a crap parent," and other people around you go, "No, it's just hard.
Right.
You're doing okay."
Right.
So you want to like get data,
Yeah.
and like honestly evaluate it, and then start with yourself. Start with your natural resources. Not everyone needs to come to see us, and unfortunately, in our area, there's way too few of us than there are people looking. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things, and maybe we're talking about dads, and maybe this is a stereotype that isn't true, but to me it seems that men and dads may be more hesitant to go to someone and say, hey, I feel like I'm a terrible parent, or I'm
Statistically that way.
struggling with whatever. But I would say maybe some people feel like that's going to make them be perceived as weak, or they don't have their act together.
Yes.
But almost anyone who's ever come to me and said, hey, I'm trying to figure this out, or hey, I'm whatever, I think the opposite. I'm like, oh, wow, they recognize in themselves, hey, something may be off here, and maybe some of the resources and people around them could help them. And to me, I view that as a sign of strength, but I think some people don't. And so it's like realizing you're not weak because you're figuring these things out actually will make you stronger.
Yes. And Western civilization views, and we're back to John Wayne. I mean, the Duke really nailed
That's what
it.
a man looks like.
Right.
You see a lot of his movies, and there's fists before talking.
Yeah.
And emotions, just sprinkled in at different times.
Right.
But from the supportive characters, never.
Yeah.
He talks about some emotions and some different ones, but it's not right in the beginning.
Yeah. By the way, I feel like Jack Bauer is the modern John Wayne from 24,
Okay.
So, because I've seen John Wayne.
Kiefer Sutherland.
But John, or why am I? What did I just say? What's Jack Bauer?
Jack Bauer.
That's the character's name.
Yeah, he's just that. Yeah, it's hit first, ask questions later.
Right. There's a couple of them out there that we could go with in that persona.
Right.
And that's it's looked at as weak for a man to go into counseling. And it's not. Counseling doesn't exactly kind of follow the threads of how a man is made to be able to process and talk, meaning to going into it.
Right.
But at the same time, Joe Rogan became the great martial artist that he is because he got beat up on a city bus. And he went, this is never going to happen again. And so then he went and he addressed it, and he learned how to defend himself.
Yeah.
Counseling isn't seen in the same way. If you have soft spots, if you have tears, this is where the anger, this is where the unresolved pieces are in your psyche, then you have soft spots to where you can be beat up in a metaphoric way, emotionally, psychologically. And rather than say
3-year-old daughter, and you don't have any idea to know how to interact with her.
Seen this.
I was just gonna say, you have some client stories where like, the 3-year-old was running the house with the 6'5" former Marine.
Grunt Marine. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so maybe that dad needed some more emotional skills to be able to wrangle that home.
He needed some emotional and psychological martial arts training.
There you go.
And that's really what counseling is.
But don't even punch your kid
judo.
Emotionally.
Well, and that's what you're learning, because if you have anger and you have unresolved issues, you're already emotionally punching them without realizing it, not because you're a bad person or a bad parent, because you were emotionally punched and psychologically punched by a parent who probably was before that emotionally punched and psychologically punched, but not as bad as what your parent did, and you not as bad as them. So you're already mitigating some of that. Counseling helps to be able to really, if it's a good counselor, because you want to find a counselor that is going to look at you not as a bad person, but as a person who is doing the best they could possibly do. And they have strengths that let's find out what those are and be able to use those and then capitalize on things from there. It's like calling the plumber. We're not plumbers. So when when the pipes get clogged, you need that expert in there to be able to understand how to get the flow moving again. And that counseling, that becomes a good metaphor for that as well.
Yeah. Love it. So basically, if you do realize that you have some unresolved issues, try to find a way, figure out what those are and a way to deal with those. So, hey, if you enjoyed this and you did miss some of the other pieces of this, definitely go back and listen to those other 4 parts in addition to this one, which makes up the 5th part of this. Like and subscribe, and definitely check out our app. Go to the App Store, search Empowering Choices Parenting, and we will see you on the next show.